This episode of Where Did the Road Go is brought to you in part by our Patreons. If you want to become a patron, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And I am joined tonight by Wren Collier.
Hey everyone.
And Cherylee Black.
Hi there.
Who is back after a long absence. We haven't heard from you since like last year.
Yeah, like that was a long time ago, yeah.
So we're going to cover some more listener stories because I got some really interesting ones. And I keep finding that I really suck at keeping up with email. It's basically what I'm finding. And I have a couple stories we're going to deal with, probably at least one that we're going to deal with from 2016 that someone sent me. That's great. Just these go all over the place. And I'm just really behind. At one point, I wanted to do a regular, almost weekly, like listener story type segment. And I just never had the time to really configure that because I wanted to have the actual listener on, talk about their experience. And I found that that is taxing because you have to coordinate with someone who may not have any easy time frame where they can, connect with you. And then you also have audio issues to deal with. And, not everyone has a good phone or a good microphone or something like that. So things sometimes get crackly or staticky or just distort or whatever. So I think it's easier to do it this way. But there's a few people I kind of want to bring on to talk about some of their stories because they have ongoing stuff happening. And the one story we talked about last time, Wren, where the thing was in the road eating something, someone suggested on YouTube it could be a llama.
A llama?
And I thought, I mean, I wouldn't know unless I'm going to send this to the person who sent me the story and see what he thinks. Because, I mean, who knows? Maybe a mangy llama or a llama with rabies?
I mean, that's actually not a bad theory. I mean, people do raise llamas in the U.S. My great uncle used to live in Talladega, Alabama. There was someone with an emu farm there. So it's people raise weird animals in the U.S. all the time, and it's not.
And llamas are not uncommon, really.
Yeah. No, if a llama had gotten out, had maybe been out in the woods for a while, was maybe starving, fur all messed up and matted, I could imagine it being really weird to, to drive up on something like that, and you wouldn't know what it is. Yeah. And
so I'm going to send that to him and see what he says.
Okay.
But, he may go, no, it definitely wasn't a llama. Or he may go, a llama,
Yeah. No, the long neck was the really interesting thing on that because there's not a lot of mammals with really long necks like that.
But llamas have long necks.
They do, yeah. So it definitely narrows it down a little bit. And, I mean, unless it was just something completely supernatural or
right.
cryptid, yeah.
But as far as a normal animal, that's the best anyone suggested. All right. So, I really wanted to get to this the last couple times. It's a short UFO story. John had sent this to me, and he said he was talking to a friend of his who was back in the Navy in the late 80s and early 90s and claimed that while at sea off the coast of Japan, he and his crew saw this metallic-looking thing that looked like a ceiling above their ship. He said whatever it was so huge that it covered the sky from horizon to horizon. He said if it was a craft, it was at least 20 miles long or bigger. He said you could see the metal above their ship, and this was during the day, and it was in complete darkness due to the entire sky being blacked out.
Wow.
That's a big UFO.
That is a very big UFO. Yeah.
Go on.
Oh, I was going to mention when you were talking about Japan and that Japan has a, long history of, anomalous lights in the sky going back, to basically medieval times. But, but yeah, that's not like anything I've ever heard before, like that big. That's insane.
I have heard a couple of stories of like the triangle type craft being fairly big, but I don't think anything quite that big.
The only thing I've ever heard that big, there's a story, I think it's in Ryan Sprague's book, where these guys were at like a drive-in movie. Everyone's cars at the drive-in like die, and this huge, he says it's like the size of like a football field, like this huge like UFO flies really close to the ground overhead and then flies off towards the town. And then everyone's cars start back up, but no one seems to have thought it was weird or noticed it at all. It was almost like it put everyone in a trance, but the guy who was observing it.
Huh.
Which I always thought that was a really fascinating story. So did he say he was on a naval vessel?
Yeah.
That's really wild. I wonder if there's anybody else that was on that vessel that could corroborate that, because that's a very dramatic story.
Well, he said the whole crew saw it. So
yeah, so there's got to be other witnesses. Yeah.
Cherylee, any thoughts?
My thoughts were, every time I've been on American naval bases, there's just weird stuff. There's just weirdness about those places. I don't know. So yeah, I mean, you gotta wonder whatever the other is, what is it interested in?
Yeah.
It was interesting that he didn't mention like seeing anything mechanical on it. Like he's just described it almost like a mirror, right?
No, he said it looked like a metal ceiling.
Metal ceiling.
Like, really, it makes you wonder if they were all observing something that was like technological, that like secret technology of ours.
Yeah.
Military technology.
Casting an illusion or something.
Yeah. That they're seeing something that is not, it's just military, and that they're not supposed to know what it is yet.
Yeah.
Or we're not supposed to know what it is yet. Like I said, that was my feeling about American naval bases, is like, was I supposed to see that?
Yeah. Testing zones.
Yeah, you just don't know what you're going to see on those places.
There are those really large, so something that has, I don't know how far this dates back. And when did he say his story was?
Late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, I don't know if it goes back as far as that, but I know that at least in the last 10 years, there have been, the U.S. at least has one platform. It's like an electronic countermeasure platform used for like cyber warfare. That is it's like a dirigible drone. It's like a drone, but it's it's set up with like a sort of a Zeppelin type body in order to stay airborne for weeks, months at a time without ever having to land. And it basically does like counterintelligence, hacking, jamming of enemy signals, that sort of thing over different zones. There are some plans for this thing that you can find online. No one ever really talks about it a lot. But I know when I remember I was listening to Sham Sheeran talking about his UFO sighting that him and his friends had in LA, and what he described reminded me so much of the plans that I had seen for this thing. But even that, like, they're supposed to be pretty big, because Zeppelins or dirigibles have to be really large to provide the lifting force you need to keep it up in the air. But even that's not nearly as big as what he was describing.
Right.
I mean, what he's describing, if it was really like miles big from horizon to horizon, I mean, if he's on the open ocean, like, that's more than just miles. If it's going horizon to horizon, that's that's hundreds of miles, because you got to think about your line of sight in the middle of the ocean. Like, there's no craft that can stay airborne. That's
why I was saying, some kind of optical illusion, maybe, even as a test. What can we project? How are they going to react to it?
Yeah. And I mean, you could also take the sort of more supernatural look at this and think, was it something like a vision? Because you read about a lot of like sort of old visions of people would have, like, especially military visions. Like, I'm trying to remember exactly what, was it Constantine had the vision of like Christ during a battle, and that's what caused him to convert? I can't remember that.
Yes, I think
was it Constantine?
I think that was it. Yeah.
I'm not really down on my Roman history or church fathers history, so. But
no, but then you hit like or Fatima, where there was these mass events that seem to affect a lot of people. That really sound a lot like UFOs and less like.
Yeah, what's interesting about a lot of those is that they're very abstract, right? Like some of them I've heard like it was giant shields in the sky, like flying around, or something like this. I think there's an interesting connection with it being like seen over like a military vessel, right? Because these sort of omens in the sky being shown to military people is something that goes back, really far as well.
That's true. All right, let's move on to the Tommyknockers one. I think I mentioned this 2 shows ago and then totally forgot about it. This comes from Ollie. He says, Tommyknockers are real. A friend and I were once in an old abandoned mine here in Germany. We picked a lock to get access, and as far as I know, this was the only still accessible way into the mine, so we knew we were alone in there. We did not make it too far into the mine when we suddenly heard a voice coming from deeper into the mine. Because there was a home for old people close to the woods where the mine was located in, we thought maybe an old person with dementia has somehow made it into the mine and was in danger, so we followed this voice. We followed it along the only shaft the voice was coming from. It got louder as we went along the shaft until the last bend where the voice just stopped. He says we went around the bend and it was a dead end. The shaft caved in a long time ago and there was nowhere the voice could have come from. At this point, I'll translate that as we got really scared and ran out of the mine and locked the door behind us. Later that day, we went to the old people's home visiting my friend's grandfather and asked if somebody was maybe missing. Luckily, nobody was missing, which on the other hand was really creepy. It says, a shame old people living there were not from the area. Otherwise, we could have asked them about the mine. So that's definitely creepy.
It's interesting. I mean, they didn't hear the knocking, which is, where the Tommyknockers get their name, but they heard that voice. It almost makes me think of like a ghost or something. Like they encountered, because they said there was a cave-in. I'd be interested if somebody had died in that mine, or if miners had been killed in that mine.
Yeah. Or it could just be a weird energy spot.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so why did they call it a Tommyknocker if there wasn't a knocking sound?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe that's what they associated it with?
Yeah, probably because it was in a mine, just sort of. Yeah, because the knocking is, supposedly because they're letting you know that the mine's about to collapse. And it's probably, people probably did hear the knocking, but it was probably, the earth and the mine timbers like about to collapse. And, like,
that makes sense, yeah.
But there is the legend that the Tommyknockers are basically miners who had died and were trying to warn other miners before like collapses and trying to help them. But it almost seems like this thing was like luring them deeper into the mine, which is
more like a will-o-wisp or something.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly fits with the narrative of being in a place where other people are not and hearing some sort of voice that lures you deeper into it.
All right. This next one is from Kevin. He says, his wife says he has a poltergeist. He has 2 stories here. He said, way back when the wife and he were dating, he said, I was 18, living in my parents' house. She was over for the day, and then it got late, and she went to leave to go home, so I walked her to the door, kissed her, and said goodbye. And I stood by the open door, watching her back out. Halfway down the drive, she stopped and just sat there. I was puzzled, was about to go out and see what was wrong. Then she slowly backed the rest of the way out. This is long before cell phones. I talked to her the next day. She said that she saw me standing at the door, but someone leaned in front of the lamp that was in front of the front window, blocking the light to her, moving the curtain. Problem being, I was home alone, and I was standing 6 feet from the window in full view of the table, the lamp, and the window, and I saw nothing.
Creepy.
And the second one is I had started a new job, was shown my desk. Week into the job, I need to use the restroom. So I walk that way. I'm following some guy who I didn't know as I was new. He went into the restroom. I caught the door before it closed. Restroom was 2 stalls and 1 urinal, all of them empty. No one was in there, no other way out. Learned eventually there was no one in the company that looked remotely like the guy I saw. Poof, just gone like that.
Wait, so he saw somebody in the bathroom
He followed someone into the bathroom, and when they got in there, he wasn't there.
Oh, so it's like so he followed someone in, and then when he got in the bathroom, there was nobody in the bathroom
Correct.
other than him.
So in the first case, the girlfriend saw something and he didn't.
Right.
And in the second case, he saw something and probably no one else did.
Right.
Okay.
In the first story, did his wife see him standing in the doorway, even though he wasn't in the doorway?
Let me go back here. It says
That's a part that I didn't quite understand.
she saw me standing at the door, but someone leaned in front of the lamp that was in front of the front window, blocking the light to her and moving the curtain.
Huh.
Maybe he was bilocating.
Maybe.
Yeah, it almost... Yeah,
Okay.
that's interesting, because I was thinking about the second story. What if was the person who was walking in front of him wearing the same clothes he was wearing?
Well, he said he asked, no one fit that description. I would think they would say, hey, isn't that you?
Yeah, yeah.
He said
Yeah.
he has a lot of little things that happen. And his wife says it's him and his poltergeist.
Yeah, let's see. Well, and if she's saying poltergeist, you got to wonder if there's a lot of like things moving or noises.
Right.
In which case, it could very well be that he was bilocating, or that that he projects beyond himself in some way.
Yeah. I mean, on the other hand, he could have some sort of spirit following him around. I mean, depending on which direction he wanted to go with that, it'd maybe be interesting to, just try to ask, say, hey, if you're hanging out, why don't you let me know who you are?
True.
Yeah. And one experience doesn't necessarily preclude the other.
Mm-hmm.
So both things could be happening,
Exactly, yeah.
because I mean, I've certainly had ghost type experiences, but my husband has seen me like have an out of body experience while seeing me, like the body part of me, like he's seen both at the same time. So
Yep. Yeah, that's something that people have seen a lot, yeah.
And your husband doesn't like stuff like that, does he?
not very much, no.
Yeah, it takes a special kind of person like me or Seriah to run towards that kind of stuff.
Right, exactly. Oh, that's weird. Let's go check it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, people who have psi phenomena manifest around them also probably will see ghosts and UFOs too. It kind of comes with the territory. So it's possible he has multiple things going on.
That was my thought. Absolutely, yeah.
All right, so this next one, it's a little long. It's really good. This is from a reverend down in Pennsylvania, Toby, and he said, when I was a kid, I always looked forward to watching In Search of with my dad. They came on every Sunday night at 8 p.m. I would usually have to go to bed at 8, but Sundays I could stay up the extra half an hour and watch the mysterious things that happened around our world. I must admit I was both terrified and fascinated. I can recall one episode that gave me nightmares for days. It was on a search for ghosts. Every bump in the night had me convinced I was surrounded by disembodied spirits. Fast forward 10 years, I joined the Navy and had just returned from my A school in Dam Neck, Virginia, to my parents' house in San Diego. I had only been home a few days when one night I had what can only be described as a night terror. It was so bad that I woke up in a cold sweat and I must have yelled out because my mother had come in to see what I was fussing about. I shared with her the dream I had. She got me a full glass of water and she sat with me until I eventually fell back to sleep. The rest of the night was uneventful, and in a couple of days I had forgotten about the dream. That was until about 8 months later. It was April 1990. I was stationed aboard the USS Constellation, a naval aircraft carrier. And here we go with the Navy again, which had been moved to the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard for what they called the SLEP, Ship Life Extension Program. It was being refit with updated everything. One of my shipmates was from Maine and was headed up that way for the weekend and asked if another buddy of mine and me would like to come along. I didn't have any family close by and I wasn't doing anything for the weekend, so I decided to tag along. We left that morning and arrived at his parents' house late that afternoon. He lived in a small town about an hour north of Old Orchid Beach, just off the 95. I had never been to Maine before. Actually, I had never been on the East Coast before, so it was a new experience for me. I was taking in all the sights, but for the most part, by the time we got to Maine, the only thing I could see was trees. To me, it was absolutely beautiful. Everywhere I looked, there were pine trees swaying in the breeze and breeze of the evening, and the smell of woods was all around. It was a place that anyone could relax and enjoy the sights, sounds, and smells of nature. That evening, we drove an hour into Old Orchid Beach and spent time on the boardwalk and visiting the shops in the area. It was a nice distraction from the hustle and bustle of South Philly and the continuous noise that a large metropolis produces. We were having a good time, having a few beers, and eating at one of the local establishments. It was like a mini vacation. As the evening progressed, we had decided to head back to Randy's parents' house. We planned to do some yard work for his parents, so we wanted to get an early start on that. The drive back to his parents' house was uneventful, and in all honesty, I had fallen asleep and didn't remember much of the ride. The next morning, we got up and had breakfast and began to plan the morning's work. There was a large number of downed tree branches from the winter that needed to be collected and burned, as well as leaves from the fall that needed to be raked and burned as well. Randy's brother was there and mentioned that we needed to go to the fire hall and get a permit to burn. I volunteered to go with him down the road to the small center of town where the fire hall was to pick up the burn permit, as well as to stop at the store that was nearby to pick up some supplies for the day: soda, beer, smokes, smokeless tobacco, etc. It was a beautiful morning as we drove down the road. The sun was up, shining through the trees. The air held the smell of pines, and it seemed that the air was getting warmer with every minute. As Randy's brother and I rounded the bend of the road that went into the town, there were a number of houses that lined the right side of the road. They were old two-story farmhouses that were neatly built and well taken care of. They seemed to fit the picture of the area perfectly. That was until we got to the last house. As we approached this home, my emotions began to swell and the pain began to rise in my stomach. I told Randy's brother to stop the car. I got up and walked to the house. I then walked to the side of the house, which confirmed my very fear. This was the house from my nightmare almost a year before. I just stood there, half frozen in fear, wanting to go inside, yet wanting to leave. I didn't know what to do. Randy's brother came to me and asked what was up. I began to walk back to the car, and as I did, I shared with him my dream. And this was the dream. He says, I describe this to you so that you can understand the layout of the house, which helps better understand the rest of the dream. So in the dream, I entered the farmhouse. There were a couple people there that I apparently knew because I just walked in the front door. As I entered the house, I remember seeing a small, maybe 6-inch wooden crucifix on the inside wall opposite the front door. The walls were painted with a dull yellow paint, and the living room and kitchen were sparsely furnished. In the living room was a couch and a coffee table with a single lit bulb hanging from the center of the room with a pull chain hanging from that. There were old dusty curtains hanging in the windows, but they were sheer and could be seen through. Walking in the front door to the left was a staircase, and if you went straight from coming in the front door, you would walk across the living room and into the small dining room kitchen, also painted in a dull yellow. There was a small kitchen with 4 chairs, an old 1940s-looking refrigerator, as well as a gas range and a counter with a washing sink and cabinets above it. From the kitchen, you could continue back through a doorway to a room that looked like a workroom of some sort. It was probably a bedroom turned into a workroom, and there was a smaller room off of that one as well that had a door that led outside. From the living room, if you went up the stairs, they would take you to a landing on the second floor that was connected to a hallway that led to 2 other rooms. But the stairway continued up to another landing where it looked to be a place where one could sit and remove outside clothing. This is because the staircase continued where it eventually connected to the top of the barn that was at the back of the house. As I walked into the house, I was met by a woman, and this is still in the dream, whom I guess I knew. She was terrified of something. She was talking so fast that I couldn't understand anything that she was saying. The only thing I could understand was that she was trying to get away from something. I had her sit on the couch, and I walked back into the dining room kitchen, which caused me to have an overwhelming feeling of terror. But I continued to the room off the kitchen, the workroom, where the light was dim and the room was cold. I could see a figure in the corner, but couldn't make out who it was. I can remember asking, "Who are you?" and getting no response. But the figure began to slowly turn its head back and forth to where I could just barely see its ears on either side. Finally, my fear overtook me, and I left the room. I went back into the living room where I left this woman, as she was no longer there. So I headed up the stairs where I ran into a man who was dressed in an old suit, looked like Charlie Chaplin without the mustache and the funny walk. He was sitting in the platform area just above the second story. It was obvious that he was frightened by something. I went back to the second story to look for the woman, who seemed to have locked herself in one of the rooms. I turned and went back down the stairs into the living room where I could smell what I could only remember to be a very bad smell. I hesitantly walked back into the dining room kitchen, where around the corner of the back room and the kitchen horribly... I think I screwed that up. Hang on. I hesitantly walked back into the dining room kitchen, where around the corner of the back room and the kitchen, this horribly disgusting-looking thing peered around the doorway. I was frightened to the core of my being. I didn't know what to do. I was frozen with fear, and this thing just looked at me with this grin that scared me even more. This being was loosely based on the features of a woman, but her face was pitted with boils and sores. Her hair was long, black, and stringy, and somewhat thin in places. You could see her ears protruding from her hair. Her skin was an ashen gray with a greenish tint to it, and her teeth were gapped wide, some of which was sharpened to a point. Her mouth was black, but with signs of blood, like there had been clotting, and her eyes were dark, almost black in the iris. I was so terrified that I felt like I needed to vomit. I got up from the chair, walked back into the living room where it followed me to the point where it was right behind me. I turned around and could see her standing right next to the crucifix on the wall, and she had this psychotic look on her face. Her lips never moved, but I could hear her talk. She said that she wanted the people in the house, and she said that she wanted the people in that house, and she belonged there. This is when I turned and headed for the front door. All I could think about was getting out of that house and into the front yard. The sun was going down, and the front light was lit, and as I left the porch and hurried down the steps, I turned to see this thing at the front door still looking at me and watching me leave. I got to the end of the walk, turned around to find her standing right behind me when I heard her say, "You're mine." And this is when I woke up. After I conveyed this story to Randy's brother, he looked white in the face. He then told me that his aunt and uncle used to own that house many years ago, so he had been there many, many times. I had never been in that house, but I was able to describe in detail what the house looked like from the inside as well as the out. But the strangest part of the story was when we got back to Randy's parents' house, I was shown a picture of his great aunt and uncle, and they were the man and woman in my dream.
But did he go in the house?
No, he wouldn't go in the house.
He wouldn't go in. Oh.
I think that's understandable.
No, he's got to confront it. Now it's just still there. It's just growing stronger. You got to go back. It's like it. You got to go take care of it now.
I'm guessing he would disagree.
But on the other hand, I would point out that it's possible to have precognitive experiences that are not necessarily to be taken literally. So all the information, like the aunt and the house and and how things look, those could all have been gotten precognitively, and that he put it together into a nightmare himself. Like the information was correct, but he created a nightmare out of it. Because that, like, when you have a precognitive dream, often they really stand out. They don't seem like so sometimes they can seem different, but they're still conveying the information. So I know I had a recurring dream about this house for years and years and years and years, and I actually went looking for the house, and my dream was actually very positive. So I was very curious, can I find this house? And it was kind of when I gave up looking for it that I found it. And the things that happened in the dream didn't actually happen, but the house looked like the house looked, and the yard looked like the yard looked. So a lot of the information that was from the dream was true information.
Right.
But in the dream, it was much more magical and grand because it was this, recurring precognitive dream.
Yeah, you're still experiencing the dreaming of something even when it's precognitive. Because I've had the same experience where I've had precognitive dreams about a place that I was to go to at some point. But in the dream, it was more fantastical or it was more abstract. But the elements were all there. Like I had a precognitive dream that I went to this sort of indoor building that had this huge roller coaster inside of it. And the next day, I went to the Mall of America for the first time, which I didn't know beforehand had a roller coaster inside of it. So, but it didn't look like it did in the dream. but the elements were there.
Right. Yeah, when I have precognitive dreams, I've noticed they're often mixed with dream imagery.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, okay, what's information and what's dream?
Yeah. I mean, on the other hand, though, I can't help but look at this from like, I don't know, like a Greek point of view and say that the dreams have some sort of purpose, and that, you know, on one hand, the dream could have been warning him away from going into the place, right? Like maybe it was a warning to say, stay away from this place. On the other hand, it may have been wanting him to go into that place and confront whatever was there. It's interesting. I think about that sometimes, about people who have precognitive dreams that are sort of like fateful, like destiny dreams, and then they don't follow through with it because people don't have a relationship with their dreams anymore. Like, because, you know, we have free will, right? We don't have to follow this dream path that we've been given. But what happens when you don't? Does it screw up somebody's plans? You know, is there some sort of, you know, the fates are like, God, dang. now we got to come up with some other plot for this guy. You know,
right? It wraps around some other way.
Yeah.
Well, and when the sort of apparition in the dream is saying they're mine, and he's taking it in a very sinister way, but really, when you think about it, they are her family. You know, like
maybe,
like he could be interpreting it very incorrectly. Like maybe she's trying to communicate, and that he was the only one sort of sensitive enough to that kind of information that he picked up on it. But to him, because she wasn't really his, you know, she didn't belong to him in any way, that he took it as a sinister thing.
Well, it did say "you're mine" at the end.
Yeah.
You know, too, it could have been metaphorical as well.
Yeah.
It could have been. I'm not suggesting that this is what was really going on, but what if there was some sort of underlying drama going on between that aunt and the uncle? Like there was abuse or some sort of thing that was weighing heavily on them, and what he saw was sort of a manifestation of that narrative, rather than something like a literal entity. But you know,
yeah, like because really, you know, I know a friend of mine who said that, you know, some houses have good vibes and some houses have bad vibes. Mm-hmm. You know, and if you find yourself living in a house that has bad vibes, the best way to fix that is just to try and create good vibes, like have parties, have friends get together, like make it a place where there's good vibes, like replace that other stuff. So, I mean, it could be just that the house had some negative history there.
Yeah. I mean, you know, who knows?
And really the way to, like I said, the way to confront that kind of thing is just to create a positive history instead. You know?
No, he didn't have to live there, so.
Well, this is true.
Yeah. It's interesting that it was like the relatives of someone that he would meet much later in life.
Yeah.
It sort of like indicates that for some reason he has a connection to this person whose family it actually was. You know, unless it was just a purely precognitive thing filtered through a dream. But I don't know, it's interesting because most people, I feel like, have precognitive dreams that involves you somehow or involves your family somehow. Like there's some sort of connection there.
Right.
But in this case, it was like a family in a house that didn't belong to him, or he had no real connection to. The only reason he ended up there was because of a series of, you know, coincidences, basically.
Yeah. All right, let's get to this one because you're gonna like this one, Wren.
Nice.
And this is from David. He's in Scotland, and he sent this back in mid 2016. And I remember reading it and going, "Oh yeah, I totally got to have David on to talk about this." And I never had a chance to get a hold of him. So hopefully he's still listening. And he says, me and my family have had paranormal experiences our whole lives, ranging from somewhat may call fairly common and normal, although to most people is anything of the sort, type stuff like your stereotypical poltergeist activity, to what seems to be UFO and alien related, to some of the stuff that I'll share that I don't think I've heard too much about at all. I doubt, okay. So I guess I'll start with a brief rundown of the family and our home to sort of set the scene, I suppose. I'm 27 years old, Have 3 little sisters who are around 24, 21, and 18. We still live with our parents in the home I was born in, which is near a town called Airdrie in central Scotland, which is probably pronounced nothing like that. Like I said, over the course of my life, I've had plenty of paranormal experiences, many of which have been shared by members of my family, and we're all pretty open about discussing, with the exception of my father sometimes, whose rational explanations for some of the events end up sounding more far-fetched than just admitting it was weird, although he's seen things that he can't explain as well. So to cut to the chase then, the strangest stories I've had revolve around strange encounters with what I can only describe as being doppelgangers. That is to say, strange alien entities that seem to try and imitate other members of the family. And just to clarify that I'm not completely crazy, other family members have experienced this too. I'll start with the earliest encounter I can remember that's related to the subject. I was around 9 or 10 at the time, and was with my eldest sister, who must have been around 7. It was summer, and our parents had just bought us a new tent that we could put up in the garden to play and camp in. A fairly small child's plaything, nothing you'd really want to use seriously. Like most summers in Scotland, the weather had turned bad at the time, and now it was torrential rain outside, so we were pretty disappointed that we couldn't get to use our new tent. Like I said before, the tent was really small, only about 3 by 3 foot or something like that, so my dad decided to set it up inside the house for us so we could spend the night in it either way. The hallway in our house was kind of an L shape with a larger, more open area at the tip of the L, so that's where it was set up. From the entrance to the tent, then, the living room door was straight across from us, our parents' bedroom door was to the right, and the toilet door was to the left. That night, me and my sis stayed up inside the new tent, eating snacks, drawing and coloring stuff in, and I played some games on my Game Boy. Eventually, our parents went to bed, and as kids do, we decided to be sneaky and stay up for way longer. Sometime during the night, one of us needed to use the toilet, so we unzipped the entrance to the tent. Inside the darkened living room, directly across from us, was the armchair that my dad always sits on when watching TV. What was strange is that my dad was sitting on it. Even though the TV wasn't on, even though all the lights were out, in confusion we called out to him, and that's when we realized that something was wrong. He sharply looked over in our direction as if caught by surprise, and then stood up very robotically and started to walk toward the tent. Both me and my sister screamed in absolute terror, at which point my real dad came out from the bedroom on the right, told us to keep the noise down and go back to sleep, and went into the bathroom on our left. Whatever was in the living room had gone at this point. We ended up sleeping in our own beds that night. Again, I'll point out that this is something both me and my sister remember to this day. So that's one. Any thoughts?
I think it could be by location or because I mean, did it disappear when his dad woke up?
Well, it disappeared when his dad came out, so that it's hard to say. That's a possibility, yeah.
Yeah.
But why so robotic?
Well, when you're in and out of body state like that, you don't necessarily think and act like you do when you're in body. You can act pretty strange. Which I want to say, like, doppelganger syndrome is like a real mental disorder, but the difference between what he's describing and what doppelganger syndrome is, because he mentioned at the beginning that, he's not crazy and his family is the same things. I just wanted to say that is a real mental disorder, but the difference between what he's experiencing and doppelganger syndrome is in doppelganger syndrome, like, you wouldn't be questioning the validity of your event. Like you would be completely convinced that it was like totally real and that you had, other yous who were living their own lives. And it's much more intense than kind of what you're describing. Like you sound like, you're open about what it may be. And if you were someone who actually had doppelganger syndrome, you wouldn't be open to any other interpretation.
So what is doppelganger syndrome?
It's basically just a mental disorder in which it's, I guess, similar to schizophrenia, but it's where people have the delusion that either they have multiple, doubles of themselves that are living their own lives that they have no control over, or that family members have sort of doubles that, are kind of living. But the difference is that in actual doppelganger syndrome, it's more similar to someone who has like schizophrenia in that if you have those disorders, you don't think you have those disorders. You know what I'm saying? Like no one who has schizophrenia thinks that they have schizophrenia. It's kind of the same thing with that. So, but in his case, I'm kind of in the same boat as Cherylee. Like that sounds a lot like he was maybe seeing his father in an out-of-body state, because with it disappearing when his father awakes, I don't know, that keys in a little bit on that.
All right, so let's go on to the next one, because I don't know that necessarily explains this next one.
Okay.
This is the one I think you're really going to appreciate.
All right.
The next encounter is probably the most vivid and bizarre I've ever had in my entire life. It's something I'm sure a lot of people won't believe because it just doesn't fit any usual descriptions of ghosts, aliens, or anything I've ever really heard about. Both me and my sister saw this entity on the same day, but on two separate accounts. I'll start with my sister's account of what happened first. I was around 12 at this time, just started secondary school. It was late summer, and this time the weather was actually pretty nice, so my family spent a lot of time in the garden enjoying it while they could. My eldest sister, who I'll call Alice, was still in primary school at the time, so she finished a half hour earlier than I did and arrived home first. The way she tells it, she came into the house to offload her school bag and stuff, and before going to join the rest of the family who were sitting out in the garden, to offload her school bag and stuff before going to join the rest of her family who were out in the garden. While she was doing this, she noticed that my youngest sister, who I'll call Marie, was sitting in the living room by herself with the TV on, but there were a few strange things that made the situation very wrong. For starters, Marie would have only been about 2 at the time, and it would be very unlike my parents to leave her unwatched in the house by herself while they were out in the garden. Secondly, she was sitting abnormally close to the large TV. We had like a foot away from the screen, cross-legged, perfectly still, not moving much. My sister Alice approached her to get a closer look, but started to feel really afraid and creeped out for some reason. She ended up running out of the house crying into the garden, where she saw the real 2-year-old Marie sitting with our parents as you would expect. Next is my account. Like I said before, I just started secondary school, so I got home a little later. I remember a similar set of events. I went into the house, noticed that everyone was out back, and went to dump my school bag, etc., and joined them. As I walked through the living room, same as my sister's accounts, I noticed Marie, alone, sitting far too close to the television to be normal. I remember being very weirded out at the time, but concerned for my sister's safety and confused to why she was left in the living room alone, so I approached her. She was extremely still, almost like a doll or something, and didn't respond when I spoke to her. I placed a hand on her shoulder from behind and nothing, not even a flinch. That's when I decided to look around at her face. If you would ask me to describe what her face looked like, well, I honestly don't think I can put it into words. The closest I can get is just chaos. Like random colors all over the place, chaotic lines and fractal patterns dancing around into infinity. Nothing made sense anymore. The chaotic colors and patterns seemed to fill up my vision and my consciousness, and I got lost in them. And after that, I have no idea. That's the last thing I remember about the encounter, just those crazy patterns and colors. I don't know what happened next that day. My sister really can't remember either. She said she can't remember what I did, or she can't really say what I did. It could have been a boring, uneventful day for all I know. I have doubted the encounter even happened if it wasn't for the fact that I still remember it as being so real, and the fact that my sister swears to this day that she saw the same thing.
Woo, that's really wild. And yeah, definitely if they both saw her, then that's definitely not a mental disorder or whatever. I mean, people don't hallucinate the same thing. So
right. Well, not only that, but it reminded me of the fractal thing you saw in the woods.
Yeah, that sort of weird, chaotic mess of triangles and stuff. Yeah. I mean, that would be something that I think you should look into more if he's still listening to the show and everything. Like, I mean, it seems like he's already tried to dig into it a bit and has looked at his, asked his sister what she remembered from that day. I think it's really interesting that they both have no real memory of what went on afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And your encounter is probably the closest I've heard to anything like that, and it's very different.
Yeah, it's almost like, I mean, this is just pure speculation, right? I'm just going way out in the left field for this one. But it almost makes me wonder if you were to see something, like an entity or something, that didn't have a filter on it, that wasn't trying to appear like something from your memory, or maybe it was incomplete. Like it was taking the form of his sister because it pulled that from his head. Right. But what if it hadn't finished the face yet? It was an imperfect replica or something. That's what I tend to think, because I always kind of wonder, like, if these things really are, like if they're the John Keel thing where they're extra dimensional entities or something. They're not going to have a physical form that we would understand, especially if they're higher dimensional than we are, something if they're 40 or whatever. So it would make sense that their, quote unquote true form would be completely incomprehensible.
Okay.
And somebody seeing something incomprehensible might have the kind of effect it had on him where he just lost his mind.
Right. Cherylee, any thoughts?
Yeah, what I was going to say is like what Wren was saying actually makes a lot of sense, because it's like, when you have a near-death experience and when you're having it, you can comprehend a lot of things that you can't bring back here. And when you get back here, you don't have the language for it. And it doesn't come with you. Even though you have these amazingly vibrant memories of the experience, you can't express it and you can't really bring it back with you into this reality properly. And that's what this reminds me of. It's something that goes beyond what can be experienced
and
as we are in this life,
I've had that happen with dreams before, where I've had some profound enlightenment in a dream, and when I get back here, I can't wrap my brain around it. It's just not, I can't process it.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of people who describe like DMT experiences, for example, or, really powerful psilocybin experiences. It's like when those filters are removed and you can see, the true nature of the chaos around us, you can't necessarily describe it, or it doesn't necessarily make sense to you as a human being with a three-dimensional, flesh brain. It's like trying to describe color to a blind person.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make any sense. And it's almost Lovecraftian, like this whole idea that seeing something that's so beyond our frame of reference or ability to comprehend it would just cause your brain to just lock up and freeze. It's like there's a story this reminds me of. I'm trying to remember if it's called The Parrot. It's like a short sci-fi story. I'm probably getting the name wrong, but I think it's The Parrot. But it's basically about a future in which people discover how to make images that will lock people's brains if they look at it. And it's, sort of described, it's called The Parrot because if you scramble the image enough where it doesn't kill you when you look at it, it sort of looks like a parrot a little bit, like a fractal nightmare parrot. But that idea has always fascinated me, the idea that through someone's visual processing, you could show them something that would cause their brain to just fail and just get locked up or go into a feedback loop or something. That's kind of what I think of when he talks about seeing this thing's face.
All right. Well, he has more.
Nice.
There, he says the next two stories are more recent and less intense than the earlier ones. The next one is something I've never experienced personally, but something my mom did a year or two ago. It was midday. I was at work. My dad and other sisters were out, and the only two people in the house were my mom and Marie, my youngest sister, who was now 16 to 17. My mom is sitting in the living room watching TV while my sister is in her room playing video games on her computer. The way our house is laid out, you need to go through the living room and into the kitchen. So as my mom is watching the TV, she sees what looks like Marie rushing from the hallway through the living room and into the kitchen at an unusually fast pace. She was moving so fast my mom couldn't make out her features very clearly, and to make things more strange, she seemed to be wearing a dress, which was unusual since Marie has always been more of a tomboy and almost never wears the things. My mom got up to see if she needed any help in the kitchen, and there was nobody there. She goes to check up on Marie, and she sees her sitting in her room playing on the computer, wearing her normal clothes, and she swears she hasn't left the computer in a while.
That even reminds me a little bit of that story I think I told on last week's show where I was talking about how I heard the thing jumping up and down on top of my bunk bed that then hit the floor and ran off into the hallway. And when I got to the living room, I found out that my little brother and family had been eating lunch the entire time.
I don't fully remember that story.
Yeah, it's just this thing where you have... It reminds me sort of Jeff Ritzman's stories a little bit, where you see a little thing dash out and run through the house. that you don't get a good look at. You know, it's.
Well, the thing for me is, I was going to say that these sort of almost they're like imperfect memories, because I mean, clearly his sister wasn't acting in her characteristic way. She wasn't dressed the way she normally was. So it wasn't like, you know, like with the dad sitting on the chair, it sounded like he was looking the way he always looked. So it could be almost like a place memory, like something, you know, like the environment is just hanging on to these memories of things that have occurred. But then when you hear that the sister is dressed the way she normally would be dressed, and it's like, why is it imperfect? Like, it's like a place memory that's kind of not quite right. Like somebody, like the place isn't remembering it correctly.
Yeah.
It's odd.
You know, I didn't think about this, but what about the idea that it could be like a time slip kind of deal, but maybe like a universe slip? You know, he's seen, like in whatever this area, this house is, like multiple parallel worlds are sort of laid on top of each other. And what they're experiencing is themselves, but just in a parallel world, like a parallel versions of themselves. Because that, I just think of that because he's talking about, you know, she's wearing a dress, but she normally doesn't wear dresses.
Right.
So what if they're kind of peering into what could have been or what might be in some parallel world? Because it's interesting that the whatever the entities are that they're dealing with, whatever they're seeing, don't seem to be trying to interact with them anyway, like, or communicate.
Right.
It's almost like they're viewing a film or something.
Well, the first one did, where he walked toward him.
He walked toward them, yeah, but yeah.
I mean, it's hard to say. That's the only one. He doesn't. He what?
Well, I was going to say, was he walking towards them, or was he walking towards something else that he was seeing and they weren't?
Well, he did seem to react to them because they called out to him, and that's when he seemed startled.
Okay, well then, yeah, I suppose, but maybe they didn't exist in his reality. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh,
like
yeah.
Maybe that's why he was going towards them. Maybe he was freaking out. Maybe he didn't have kids in that.
Yeah. Maybe he heard disembodied voices calling his name, and he was like, "What is going on?" You know, and to go look for them.
Well, his last one here, he says, is the most recent, happened about a year ago, and something both he and his dad experienced. He says, my two youngest sisters, Maria and Zoe, had left that evening to go to a rock concert that was playing in Glasgow that night. It was around 11:30 p.m., and I was sitting in the living room with my dad watching TV and chilling out while waiting for them to come home. Our house is on the second floor, and you need to walk up a set of stairs to get in. So at around 11:30, we hear the front door open, close, and my sisters coming up the stairs as they do. They're talking about something, and one of them laughs as they approach the top. Me and my dad are sitting there, waiting in anticipation, you could say, for them to come inside the house proper. We sit, and the top door never opens. So I go out to investigate. The lights are off, the staircase is empty, and there's no sign of them. We decide they must have gone back out to a friend's place or something and forget about it until about 20 minutes later. Once again, the front door opens and closes. We hear them walking up the stairs talking to each other, but it's not just that. It's the exact same footsteps, the exact same conversation we heard before, and the exact same laugh if they reach the top, only this time the top door opens and they come into the house. We questioned them about when they came in earlier, but the two of them swear they didn't. They had literally just gotten out of a taxi and hadn't come home any earlier. He says, I'm not sure what to make of this event, whether it was something imitating my sisters or some kind of dimensional or time slip. I looked up some folklore on the matter and found the Vardoger, which I just put a show up about, which is Scandinavian folklore about a spirit that imitates people and arrives in locations before they do. And, yeah, that's a weird one. The whole Vardoger thing is odd. It's hard to pinpoint exactly where that's coming from.
That is similar to the Vardoger thing. And it's funny that he mentions the time slip thing right after we do.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
That's obviously something he's thought of, yeah.
He says, like I said before, I've had other experiences in my life too, poltergeist-like stuff, such as hearing footsteps when nobody should be there, objects moving by themselves, kitchen appliances turning themselves on, and have also seen strange flashes and sparks of light manifest in thin air. I've seen non-doppelganger apparitions, such as shadowy figures. I've also had strange encounters in bed and experienced things that would relate more to the alien side of things, although I can't say for sure that I've ever really seen the typical description of an alien for real. Aside from a few encounters that may or may not have been dreams, it's hard to say for sure. I will say that for some reason I'm extremely afraid of them. Even a cartoonish drawing of a stereotypical gray, I hate even using that word, makes the hairs stand up on the back of my neck and fills me with dread and fear. So yeah, he definitely sounds like he has some interesting experiences.
Yeah, so my completely speculative, just completely idiotic theory here is that he exists in an area in which there's time slips or dimensional slips happening. Case closed.
Well, solved that one. Good job.
No, but those are really cool stories. I mean, that's a lot of stuff to happen, and it's really fascinating that's happening to multiple members of the family as well.
Yeah, I'd be interested if anything happens to them away from that location.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as it's centered around that location, exactly.
Yeah, that's a good point. It seems to be, at least those were.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to mention, Seriah, the name of that short story I was trying to think of about the fractal thing.
Yeah.
It's just for the listeners who might want to go read it because it's for free online. It's called Blit by David Langford.
Bullet or Blit?
Blit, like B-L-I-T.
Okay.
Yeah, it's B-L-I-T by David Langford. And you can just Google it. You can find it online if you want to read it for free. It's pretty short. But it's a fun little story.
Okay. All right, this next one is a weird in the woods story. It kind of reminds me of the two guys that we had two different stories from the last couple times we've done this, and their names are escaping me. But Patricia sends this one in. It's actually written for her blog, and it says, the Hudson Valley is no stranger to high strangeness. Witness Whitley Strieber's experiences with supernatural beings and the Pine Bush phenomena and the UFO sightings all up and down the Hudson Valley. Most notable, those reports by Linda Zimmerman and J. Allen Hynek. She says, remember, I'm not saying that UFOs are real. I'm saying experiences of the observers are real, and to put it another way, they are real to the observer and worth studying. Putnam County, less than an hour upriver from Manhattan, has certainly seen its share of strangeness, if the reports are to be believed. And just east of the Hudson Valley, in the river, just east of Hudson River, in the middle of Putnam County, is where I had a couple of very strange experiences that have made me wonder about consciousness, the trickster, and what may be beyond our known world. And she entitled this The Invisible Stalker. This experience happened in the mid to late 1980s. At the time, I was studying with a Native American elder. Oh, let's see if I can massacre this name. Oshina. Yeah, we'll go with Oshina. O-H-S-H-I-N-N-A-H. I hope I got that somewhat right. As part of her teaching, she had us do exercises to harmonize with the four elements: earth, air, fire, and water. I was working on water, so every time I visited near Cold Spring, New York, I would go down to this wonder-filled place just below the dam of a man-made lake. It was a truly magical spot, and I'd always felt the encircling love of nature while there. One of the most beautiful spots was by a stream, and there I practiced the water ceremony Oshina taught us. It was there I first experienced tiny sparkles in the air, what I thought to be air spirits, but later learned are identified as water spirits. On this particular day, the sparkles danced in and out of my field of vision, and somehow I started to experience the entire area as separated, but separated from what, I'm not sure. The experience, this bubble of sparkles surrounding the stream and woods for maybe 50 feet in all directions, so I sat transfixed. Whether I started to move first or the sound of something moving through the undergrowth caught my attention, and I stood, I do not remember. But I looked around me, and it was as if, off in one direction only, the background was muted out. It was fuzzy and without distinction. That, anyway, is what I experienced. Then a wave of apprehension hit me. I have never been so anxious in this place before. Indeed, it was a place where stresses always fell away from me. Deciding it was just my imagination, I ignored it and relaxed. It hit me harder, and now I was afraid. I ducked behind a tree and stood stone still. Not a sound. All was quiet again. Come to think of it, not even a bird was singing. Peeking out, I searched the woods for deer. They often came close when I was there, but I saw nothing. The sparkle was gone, except in one area up a muted hill. But as I moved again, the sound of something disturbing the brush returned. I froze, and all was quiet. I moved, and it moved. For a very long time I stood stock still, the fear mounting. Something was playing cat and mouse with me. Finally, I grabbed my things, intending to hurry out of there. The sound of movement returned, and now I was choking down panic as I hurried back to the dam. A time or two I looked over my shoulder but saw nothing. It stopped following me as I neared the dam. I hurried past the dam and up the dirt road, really more a trail with 2 ruts, and back to the cabins. There, in a more public spot, I sat for a while, waiting for whom or whatever was stalking me to come out, as there was no other trail to follow but that one. Nobody and nothing ever came. It was years later that I heard about Bigfoot and the experiences of others, experiences like mine, as if something was throwing fear at them. The hypothesis put forth by Bigfoot researchers is that Bigfoot uses infrasound to scare away unwanted visitors. Infrasound that does create the experience of fear. Was it Bigfoot or a family of them passing in the woods? I don't know. All I know is that I experienced something that was both real and unreal to me, something I would come to experience a couple more times in my life, that led me on a quest to discover what is beneath these experiences. The something, I believe, is the most basic field of all, a field of consciousness out of which we create ourselves and our experience. And, no, I said that wrong. A field of consciousness out of which we ourselves create experience. And maybe have created the image of Bigfoot to explain these experiences. If that is true, then Bigfoot is becoming very real indeed. She says, what I found out later is that some Native Americans believe that Sasquatch is a guardian of the elementals. I wish I could find the interview in which I heard this, but it was with an elder who was discussing Native beliefs about Sasquatch. And her blog is knittingittogether.com if anyone wants to take a look. So, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar. Her story is very similar to a lot of Bigfoot stories I've heard about them pacing people out of the woods. That's more of a Tim Renner, Josh Cutchin area, but it's certainly something I've heard before.
It's so what strikes me. Well, first of all, the whole elemental thing was interesting. Seeing the little flecks of light. Was it light, or they were just shiny? How did she describe them?
I think she's seen the little flecks of light in the air,
tiny sparkles in the air.
Yeah.
So you have the light element there. But it reminds me of the experience that those 2 guys went through, where they had something, where he's had the thing rushing around him, you know, and they put it down to Bigfoot. But as you put it, it could very well have been a spirit.
Yeah. I was gonna say, well, it's just, so something happened. I guess if you know me, I do a lot of walks in our local park, and over the years since we've lived in this area, I've seen lots of anomalous lights there, and I've taken pictures, although usually the pictures never really show what you see. Sometimes they'll show something, but it's never the way it looks. But what was really bizarre was that the areas that I tended to see these lights, those were all the areas that were destroyed by a recent tornado. And it was almost like those areas had some future memory of weird energy.
Huh.
And you know, and it's funny because I've been looking through my old notes where I'd take the photographs and I'd write about, how was I feeling and stuff when I was taking these. And in a lot of cases, there's just terrible fear which made no sense to me because it's a friendly neighborhood park. And yet, and there was one I was showing it to a friend of mine and I go, yeah, this is a really bizarre picture of these weird lights that I can't explain. And I said, and you know what that looks like now? It's like ground zero where the tornado came down.
Wow.
It's like just the center of the debris field.
Huh.
And so
you can catch these lights on camera.
Sometimes, yeah.
So that implies that they have some physical existence. It's not just saying you're sensing.
Or that I'm projecting, because they never look the same on camera as they do when what I see. But something turns up sometimes. And and the fact is that these are places that I felt a lot of fear. And it's funny because I had this one spot in the forest that always felt safe to me. And not only have I dreamt about this spot, but a friend of mine had a dream about this spot, and he lives in Europe and has never seen the spot, and he described it to me. And it was like this weird cross-correspondence experience that involved a couple of us about, about this tree. Well, this tree is in this little tiny island that was untouched by the tornado.
Yeah, I remember you talking about that. I don't know if it was on the air or not, but yeah, that's fascinating.
And it was like, there's my favorite tree that I would touch, and it would like feel safe there. And like the next tree over, like less than 2 meters away from it, is gone.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's almost like places remember things that haven't happened yet.
Yeah. The experience of having something like sinister follow you, I've had numerous occasions, but it happened to be for a while, for like months on end at one point. Anytime I was outside by myself, everything would go dead quiet, and I could hear something following me. And never saw anything. It never did anything, and it finally stopped it by I sat down in front of my barn, and just said, "Okay, if you're going to do something, do something." And after about 10 or 15 minutes, all the sound came rushing back, and it never did it again.
Yeah. Stuff doesn't like it when you stand up to it, I found.
But I feel like that was the whole point. Like, I had to deal with that sense of fear,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was so much standing up to it as much as that's what it wanted me to do, is to stop and deal with it. But I would, I'd come home with, some friends or whatever, and everything was normal outside, and they'd leave, and I'd walk outside, and everything was dead quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so creepy. It takes a lot to creep me out.
I mean, I definitely expect to experience what she experienced if I was out in the woods conjuring elementals. And that's the thing. I don't necessarily have a physical Bigfoot kind of mind. I tend to think of it as more of a spiritual thing as well. I don't know about the whole protector of the elementals thing. I'd be interested in reading more about that if I could find some sources for that information. But I do certainly, and got to mention too, she didn't actually see anything. So I mean, we're saying Bigfoot here just because we've heard Bigfoot stories that are similar to this, but it was still invisible. It was basically poltergeist activity. And that goes back to the thing we've mentioned a lot on this show about, the wilderness geist. Like,
yep. The wilderness poltergeist, yeah.
Yeah, this activity being something in the woods that is invisible, that mimics what people experience as poltergeist activity in their house.
And she was opening herself up to this stuff too, because she was kind of meditating on the whole elemental thing. Yeah,
and I think when you do magic, you light up, a bit, and then things come to check you out because they want to see what is this human out here doing. It doesn't necessarily mean it's sinister. I think that feeling of like of it being sinister is probably more just your animal brain being like, there's something here I can't see, and that's scary.
Yeah. That could be. That could be. Well, I don't know. When I had the thing following me, it definitely projected a feeling of something oppressive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because I don't get freaked out very easily. If something just was following me, it wouldn't necessarily freak me out. There was something very sinister about the feeling. I don't know if it was, but like I said, I almost feel like it was there to make me face it, so I could face that fear and deal with it.
Well, there's a kind of two sides to that coin, because you have the theory on one hand that infrasound can generate experiences like ghost experiences. I mean, it's been studied and documented that exposing people to certain frequencies of infrasound can cause them to feel uneasy, revolted, paranoid.
Yeah.
On the other hand, these are experiments in which the sound is being generated, and in places where the sound might be generated by, say, industrial equipment or something like that. If you're out in the woods and you have this experience, well, either something's generating that, or you can think of it on the other side and think about how some people have theories like Keel that these things, whatever they are, exist in some different vibratory state. Now, I tend to shy away from the whole vibrations thing because I think it sounds very new agey and woo, and I don't know. I'm not like probably the last person in the world to talk about woo, but something about the vibration stuff just kind of, I don't know. It sounds silly to me. But it would maybe make sense if something was manifesting from some lower vibrational frequency, if it was also causing infrasound to emanate from itself through its manifestation. You know, kind of like radiation, basically.
Sure. Yeah. Cherylee, any thoughts?
I don't know. I mean, I think sometimes weird energies in the woods can affect people differently. A number of years ago, my husband and I were on a road trip out to the Maritimes, and we had stopped at just a rest stop beside the road. It was, a very pretty park with a little stream going through it. And we had the dog with us, so we went and took the dog for a walk. And I absolutely loved that place. Like, I was just sucked right in. I could have just stayed there forever. I was totally blissed out on the place. And I got some really bizarre photographs of, maybe I was just, glare from the sun or something. I don't know, but they're neat photographs. And my husband, on the other hand, he wanted out of there right now, and he kept yelling at me to hurry up. And he did not like it there, and he wanted to go right this minute.
Well, and your husband not being all that okay with this stuff, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, but and because I remember, I was there trying to take pictures, and he was like, grabbing me by the hand and pulling me along to get back to the car. So yeah.
Huh.
And yet I asked him about it later, and he didn't seem to remember much of that. Oh, we just stopped for a minute to use the rest area. That was it. Like, he doesn't really.
Just blocked it out.
Yeah.
All right. So this one wanted me to leave his name out of it, so I'm going to do that. He said, I wanted to share my favorite story from a rather eventful and peculiar life. There are others, maybe stranger, spookier, or more personally significant, but I like to tell this one because it's quite simply the most impossible to dismiss. It was summer sometime in the early 90s in a small town in northeastern Pennsylvania. At the time, I was sitting with a good friend who I'd known since I was 8 and still do to this day. Now, these details become significant, so bear with me, please. It was summertime, early evening, just past dusk, and Pennsylvania summers get hot and humid, so there were 2 lamps, different sorts with different types of switches on opposite sides of the room, and 2 fans, an oscillating one and a box fan in the window, and an old stationary stereo was playing a cassette tape. Now, this friend and I both became interested in the occult about the same time, and we were, at that moment, discussing him experimenting with some goetic stuff involving trying to contact some spirit or another. Now, he had just told me how he had constructed this black mirror for the purpose of scrying in those rituals, and one time he freaked out and stopped because he had some sort of visual, whatever, where the surface of the mirror looked like it was stretching and distorting out of shape as though being pushed outwards, so he said he stopped using that method. So I asked him if he tried anything since, and I'll never forget it, because he said yes, but I don't think it worked, nothing really happened. And just when he said that, everything went black and silent. The fans and the stereo all went off, the lamps went out. Given the timing, that was weird enough, but since it was summer in a small town with a crappy old power grid, I first assumed it was just a local blackout, which wasn't uncommon when everyone was running fans and air conditioning in the hot months. But as I got up, I could see the street lamps were on outside, so as I was going to see whether we blew a fuse or a circuit or something in the basement, without thinking, I flicked a wall switch, and the light came on, which should have been on the same circuit. So I went back into the room and checked. The 2 fans and lamps had all been manually turned off, some with push buttons, some with twist dials, and the stereo had both the volume dial turned off and the power button pressed off and stop pressed on the cassette. Now, this friend happens to be a physicist and an electrical engineer, and he firmly attests that there is no way some weird power surge or anything could make those switches turn off like that, even aside from the timing of that occurring. I love to tell this story because I feel like you can't write it off as seeing things, imagination, odd, or coincidence, or fantasy, though I usually leave the details about being goetic and the mirror and stuff off. That almost makes it too weird. So, thoughts?
Not too weird to me.
No, I was going to say that.
I was going to say, this is right in my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
I mean, let this be a valuable lesson to the Where Did the Road Go listeners. Like, look, spirits are real, okay? Like, demons are real. Not everything's demons, but there are demons. And if you're doing Goetia, just to see what would happen, that's not a good way of going about it. These are goetic spirits are like powerful entities that, you know, are not necessarily evil, but they're not human either. And they don't want to be just bothered by someone just trying to see if they exist. So, you know, that's what I mean. If you're going to make the Black Mirror and start doing it and get freaked out the first time something happens, and maybe it's not really for you, you know. And I mean, I would just look, I don't want people to scare people away from engaging with this sort of thing, because I engage with it and you can engage with it too and get, you know, good results from it if you need it for some reason. Just, you know, just know that it's real, and it's not something to be messed around with. Like, it's a very serious endeavor that requires, you know, time and devotion and protection from things. Yeah, it's, you know, I like that he left it on, because that certainly explains the encounter a lot more.
Yeah, yeah. Cherylee, any thoughts?
Well, I guess my feeling is I wouldn't use the word demons to describe anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just my personal belief system, is I don't really believe in those things, but or at least I don't believe in that terminology, but
right,
I think,
right.
I mean, and I think that it could just be us creating these things,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or it could be other things creating these things. I mean, there's not really any way to know. But my feeling is these kinds of experiences are reported again and again.
Mm-hmm.
And so, no, when someone says this kind of thing has happened, it's like, yeah, those things happen.
Yeah. I mean, I use the term, let me also clarify too for the listener base. When I use the term demon, what I specifically am referring to is a class of spirit that is, or at least seems to be, distinct from, say, the human dead, or, you know, angelic entities, or elementals, whatever. Like, there are sort of different classes of these, you know, extra human intelligences that react and act differently. That's the reason they're separated into different classifications, is because they react to things differently. I listened recently to a podcast that had a really good short little episode about the Greek philosopher Iamblichus's ideas about, you know, what quote unquote demons were. They didn't have the word demon then. I mean, they had like daemon, but not, he didn't refer to them as demons, but what he was saying was that there is a class of spiritual entity that seems to exist in an almost mechanical way, that can carry out instructions and can be called to carry out and do things, that doesn't seem to have the ability to lie, or doesn't seem to let me phrase that differently. It can lie, but it doesn't have the ability to detect fiction from fact, or truth from fantasy. So that's why when, you know, you're doing Goetia and you wear a paper crown and you call yourself King Solomon and you tell spirit that you're going to send it, you know, to the deepest depths of hell where it will be tortured, none of these things are true, but the spirit reacts in such a way that as if they were true. And the reason, at least Iamblichus's idea behind that, was that these things can't tell fact from fiction. And that's why they get the reputation for being liars or lying people. It's not that they're lying. They just don't know what's real and what's not. Everything's real to them. So they'll tell you kind of whatever's on their mind, regardless of whether or not it's true or not. But again, like, you know, the word demon, like I think Cherylee was getting at, is wrapped up in a lot of cultural baggage.
Yeah.
You know, it's a word that derives from, you know, this Greek idea of sort of just a spirit, basically. But yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. Like, when I say demon, I'm just talking about a specific set of entities that appear in various grimoires as, you know, distinct from, say, angels.
Okay. Got one short one here. Kind of just an odd little one, and I think we'll end on this one because we're running out of time. I still have more. This one's also about 2 years old. And I just suck at keeping up with things sometimes. All right, so this one comes from Sue. And she said, I had a 35-cent off coupon for a specific brand of kitty litter. And I was at a chain pet store on a double coupon day, and I was really counting on doubling that coupon's value and became somewhat agitated when I couldn't find the brand of kitty litter in this usually well-stocked store. I pulled the coupon out of my back hip pocket. I was wearing what they used to call painter's pants to check the brand again, pacing up and down the aisles. Then I tried to put the coupon back in the pocket and got even more annoyed when it wouldn't fit. Walking along and scanning the shelves for the right brand, I fumbled and fumbled, trying to shove the coupon back into my rear pocket. It just wouldn't go, and finally I was like, what the hell? And I pulled it out to see what was wrong. What was wrong is I wasn't holding a 35-cent off coupon for kitty litter anymore. I was holding an $11 BART ticket, BART being the local light rail transit system. The shape and size was different, which explains why it would not fit in the pocket the way I expected. I stopped looking for the right brand of kitty litter and stood there for a moment and then walked out of the store. Once I was out of anyone's earshot, I said aloud, okay, that just happened. If I ever try to tell anyone, they won't believe me, but it happened, which is kind of cool. But if you're trying to get my attention, I've got more pressing issues than you to deal with, and it's not even in the top 5. The context of this event is that I had rapidly gone from being middle income class to living at poverty levels, and was also dealing with the tendency to depression that experience had taught me could be life-threatening. I was putting all my effort into being at the top of my game in the face of some serious challenges I had never encountered before. Every expenditure I made at that point had to be very calculated, especially when it came to taking good care of my pets I had taken responsibility for. I needed kitty litter. I did not need to go anywhere on BART. So that is, she says, that is my best story, waking physical reality being altered enough to give me pause, but not in the end being very significant. And that's odd.
Yeah, that's a fun story. It's like, well, the universe just gave me something, but it's not what I needed.
Right, exactly. And right there in her hand as well.
Yeah. It's interesting.
I was going to say, apports don't have to be anything useful, though. I mean, look at how many are pieces of glass or coins.
Yeah.
They're like pennies, you know?
Yeah, but it wasn't just an apport because it's something that changed. It didn't just apport, it changed from one thing to another.
Yeah, or one thing left and another thing came.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough.
We don't know that it transmuted. We just know that it wasn't what was originally there.
Right, a few moments earlier.
It almost makes me wonder if, like, something... I mean, I know she didn't actually take the trip on BART, but it would be interesting to see, like, how far $11 would have taken her, and if wherever that would have taken her would have been an interesting place for her, or some significance. Because it's very similar to... I don't know if you've seen, like... I may be using the wrong word here, but sort of... It's not really psychic tripping, but it's... Or no, like, I think I'm thinking of the word legend tripping or something. But there are people who do this in London where basically you just follow coincidences until you end up somewhere.
It's kind of Douglas Adams, what should we call it? His the holistic detective agency.
Yeah, exactly. Dirk Gently, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just basically just keep following the coincidences until you arrive at something hopefully significant to you.
Huh.
But that's not always, an easy thing for people to do. So.
No, true.
And maybe she just wanted to get away from everything.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Yeah, could have been a manifestation of her own unconscious desires.
Didn't realize that, and there it is.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I think that's about all the time we have, and I still have more stories. Some of them a couple years old. But if you have a weird story, it doesn't have to be a weird story in the woods. It can be anything. Send it along to stories@wheredidtheroadgo.com, and we will talk about it in a future episode. So, Wren, where can people find you?
So, I maintain a not frequently updated blog at liminalroom.com. You can also check me out on Twitter at Mr_APaul.
All right. And Cherylee, people can't find you anywhere.
That's right.
So if you really want to talk to Cherylee, write us at contact@wheredidtheroadgo.com, and I can always pass it on to her.
That'd be good.
All right. Thank both of you. This was really interesting.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Oh, thank you.
And a special thanks to all my patrons who help make this podcast possible. And a special shout out to those pledging $10 or more. Tim. An extra special thanks to Tim. Allison Cook. Super Inframan. Andy McNamara. Bart Ooms. Charles Beauregard. Craig Cicernos. Eric Citron. Jose A. Kevin. Scott Morris Everett. Sean Cosgrove. Robert Groom. Roland Belstadt. Riker and Stark. John Rutledge Foster III, Sasha Org, Christopher Vaughn, Samantha, Ben Crow, American Rambler, Carla Mahoney, John Eddy, Chris, Mark Brady, William Lovelace, Patricia Giaquinta, Kevin Schreck, Paul Buscini, and Alfred Tuttle. Thank you all so very much. All right, so if you're out there listening and you've had a weird experience, send us your story at stories@wheredidtheroadgo.com. And I have at least another show's worth already. Keep sending them. We'll talk about them, go over them, etc. And there is a Patreon extra segment that we recorded after this. It has nothing to do with these stories, though. It's all about magic and conjuring and things like that. If you want to become a Patreon or a patron, however you want to say it, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com, and on the upper right of the screen, there's a link to Patreon, and you get extra content for only $3 a month. See you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.